What are you talking about? I've never received any living expenses. The stunned mother-in-law seems to be telling the truth. What do you mean? Explain it properly. My husband, who was shrinking in fear, was questioned by both me and my mother-in-law. I am Irisa, an office worker at the age of 37. I live with my husband Jin and my mother-in-law. I met my husband through a friend's introduction and we hit it off. We had a whirlwind romance and got married within 4 months of meeting. Everyone celebrated our marriage since we were both over 35. My mother-in-law and I deepened our relationship by going out to eat together even after the marriage proposal. Generally, people say, mother-in-law and daughter-in-law problems. I believe we have a good relationship. When my father-in-law passed away, my husband and I moved out of our house and started living with my mother-in-law. She always takes care of the house in my place, and we live peacefully without any concerns about mother-in-law bullying, which can often be a source of trouble. I often come home late from work and I rely on my mother-in-law for everything to do with living. In return, although it's hard to say this, I give her money separately from the living expenses as a token of my gratitude via my husband. Of course, giving her money doesn't absolve me of guilt, but I thought it was a good way to somewhat ease my guilty conscience. However, recently, my husband's food intake seems to be increasing, and I'm a little worried whether it can be covered with the living expenses I'm providing. I decided to ask my husband about it first. I want to discuss the living expenses that we are giving to your mother. You've been eating a lot lately, and your mother is taking care of everything from cooking to cleaning, right? I think we could give her a bit more. What do you think? I'm sure she's happy just living with us, and she's not saying she doesn't have enough, so it's probably fine, right? But I believe we should show our gratitude, not just say it. So from next month, I'll add a bit to the living expenses. Can we give that to your mother? When I said this, my husband smiled happily and nodded. Really? That would be great. Actually, I was thinking the same thing a little bit. I was somewhat surprised by a sudden change in his demeanor, but I decided not to worry about it since my husband's good mood is not a new thing. So I started giving my mother-in-law a little more for daily expenses. A little while after that, I had a major accident. I collided with a bicycle at an intersection and broke my leg, resulting in a 2-week hospital stay. When my husband heard about the accident, he brought my belongings to the hospital. Are you okay? It looks painful. Poor thing. I'll let Mom know about the fracture. Thank you. I can't call because I'm in a shared room. Can you tell your mother that I'll call her once I can move around? My husband cheerfully responded, no problem, and left. Something about his demeanor stuck with me, but I told myself it was just my imagination. A week passed. My husband hadn't shown his face since the first day of my hospitalization, and there was no sign of my mother-in-law visiting. It's understandable for my husband who has work, but it's unthinkable for my mother-in-law who is a warrior not to come. I moved to the chat room with my crutches. I checked my cell phone, but there was nothing at all. Thinking I should contact my husband first, I called him, but he didn't answer. Figuring he might be at work, I decided to contact my mother-in-law next. She answered after the 3rd ring. Oh, Irisa, you're working hard. With sudden contact, did something happen? Mother-in-law, I think you've heard from Jin, but I'll be hospitalized for another week. So I'm sorry, but could you bring me some change of clothes? What? Hospitalization? What happened? I could tell that my mother-in-law was disturbed on the other end of the phone. I was confused. I didn't think my mother-in-law was lying. Could it be that my husband hadn't told her about my hospitalization? Even if that were the case, I would expect her to contact me immediately if she was suspicious about me not returning home. Anyway, I'm going to the hospital right now, she said and hung up. 30 minutes later, my mother-in-law showed up, dripping with sweat. It takes about 40 minutes from our house to the hospital by train and on foot. It seems she really rushed to get here. Mother-in-law, thank you for coming all the way here. I'm sorry, but didn't you hear anything from Jin? Jin told me that you would be on a business trip for 2 weeks. He said it was sudden, so he asked me to take a message. And Jin seems to have gone on a business trip too, so he's not at home now. Hearing that, possibility crossed my mind. Maybe my husband is having an affair. He is an illustrator by profession, so he can work anywhere. However, according to him, the best work environment is at home, and he wouldn't work outside unless he had a compelling reason to do so. While he occasionally has meetings nearby, I know that he doesn't have meeting far enough away to necessitate a business trip. Why do I know this? Actually, I work at the same company as him as an office worker. Are you okay? You look pale. Are you feeling unwell? Mother-in-law, the people who go on business trip at our company are usually in sales. Jin and I, being in the administration, we don't go on business trips. My mother-in-law, who seemed not to have noticed anything, was puzzled when she heard my story. As I envied her innocence, I continued speaking. Jin lied to me and to you, mother-in-law. He didn't take any days off at the company for the past week, so he must be working somewhere. But where he's gone, I have no idea. Oh my, leaving his wife in a hospital and even lying to me? Didn't Jin say anything, like about his business trip location? Now that you mention it, he did say he was staying at the hotel in Okinawa because the company had arranged it. Here, this is it. My mother-in-law searched on her cell phone and showed me the website of the hotel my husband had mentioned. That hotel was a place where we had stayed during a trip together. Moreover, it was the hotel we had stayed at for our wedding anniversary. It's an upscale hotel, where it's unthinkable for a company to cover the cost for a business trip. The way he brushed it off so carelessly gave me a headache. Mother-in-law, it's hard for me to say this, but Jin may be cheating. What? Jin? No way. But indeed, this situation is suspicious no matter how I think about it. That's it. Let's ask the hotel if he's really staying there. Saying so, my mother-in-law called the hotel. After hanging up the phone a while later, she was smiling. He seems they'll check for us. First, we have to confirm the fact. As it turns out, that hotel is apparently run by my mother-in-law's relative. My husband should know because he was told about it before, but I wonder if he forgot. About 10 minutes later, my mother-in-law's phone rang. Sadly, as expected, my husband was indeed staying there. What's more, he seemed to have a woman with him. I was astonished at the name I was told exceptionally, although it shouldn't be disclosed. I know her. Or rather, she's my friend. My mother-in-law was also surprised to hear that. My husband's mistress was Kelly, a colleague at the same company and also my friend. Kelly and my husband work in the same department. What's more, it was her who introduced my husband to me. She even attended our wedding and gave a speech. My mother-in-law said, "Unbelievable," and her face turned red with anger. She was about to contact my husband right away, but I quickly stopped her. I'll hire a detective to gather solid evidence of his affair, and I'm going to divorce a man who has an affair with his wife's friend. I plan to claim damages, so I think it might cause trouble for you, mother-in-law. That's not a bother at all. It's unbelievable that he would betray such a wonderful daughter-in-law. Let's gather the evidence and teach my foolish son a lesson. Upon hearing my mother-in-law's word, my spirit lifted a bit and I decided to start looking for a detective agency to gather evidence. It turned out that one of my mother-in-law's relatives knew a reputable agency and introduced me to them. And I decided to hire them for the job. A few days later, I couldn't stop laughing while reading the report the detective agency had prepared for me. Unbelievably, my friend was identifying herself as my husband's wife during their trip. 3 days before my discharge from the hospital, I called my husband. He had no idea that his mother knew about my hospitalization. How are you feeling? I'm sorry I haven't been able to visit you due to work. I promise I'll be there to pick you up on the day you are discharged. Is there anything you need or want? It seems my recovery is slower than expected, and my discharge has been postponed. I'll be discharged a week from now. I'm borrowing clothes from the hospital, so that's not an issue. But I don't have any cash on me. I need you to withdraw some money for the hospital bill. Could you bring it with you on the day of my discharge? I see, that's tough. Then I'll withdraw the money and pick you up on discharge day. Oh, and Mom was worried too. She wanted to visit, but she's caught a cold. She was really down about not being able to go. I'll let her know about your delayed discharge. My husband, acting as if everything was his, was lying through his teeth. I, knowing all of it was a lie, struggled to hold back my laughter. Is that so? Is my mother-in-law okay with her cold? Please tell her to take care. Also about work, you did contact them, right? Did they say anything about my allowance? Yes, they did mention it, but I can handle all the procedures, so I'll take care of it for you. You just focus on resting and recovering. I see, thanks. Then see you in a week. I already knew that my husband had been telling my company about me. In fact, I had called my company before I called my husband to check. Apparently, my husband had said that he was going on a trip with his wife and had applied for my paid leave. Because of this, when I called the company, my boss asked me right off the bat, "How's the trip? Are you able to rest well?" When I explained about my injury, he seemed surprised but listened to the details attentively. He then rushed to the hospital with someone from the HR department. Thanks to that, I was able to smoothly receive my sickness benefit. According to my boss, my husband had been hard to reach for the past week and had been pushing back deadline. Also, my friend, who was his affair partner, seems to be equally. In fact, it seems that this has been going on for the past 6 months. I asked my superiors not to say anything to my husband or his mistress for the next week about this incident. And I told them that I don't mind whatever action they take afterwards. And as planned, I was discharged from the hospital 2 weeks later. It appears there was an application for additional paid leave addressed to my company from my husband, who thought my discharge was postponed. And it seemed that he told my mother-in-law that his business trip was extended. Extending his trip with his mistress, even though he said his wife's health wasn't good and her discharge was postponed. Maybe he no longer has any love left for me. I felt a little bit sad. And I decided to take advantage of the paid leave that my husband had applied for on my behalf. "Make him suffer," my boss said. My mother-in-law and I spent a week preparing for the retaliation until my husband returned. And the day before the day I was scheduled to be discharged, I called my husband. "Hello, how's your mother doing? I'm feeling good. I got to leave a day early, so I'm discharged today. I'll be paying with my card and I can get home on my own, so you don't have to pick me up. You have work today, don't worry about me." "What?" "Okay, I have a meeting coming up and another appointment tonight, so I probably won't get home until midnight. Sorry." "That's fine, don't worry about it. I can take a taxi home." Hearing the shopping center announcement in the background on my husband's end, I replied while suppressing my laughter. Then I hung up the phone as if nothing was wrong and pressed the stop button on the IC recorder. I already had the detective's information that he was planning to go shopping today. That's why I made the call at this time on purpose. When I checked the recording on the IC recorder, the announcement from the shopping center was clearly recorded along with my husband's voice. My flustered husband called my mother-in-law right after talking to me. According to her, he said, "Actually, I'm on a trip with a friend after the business trip." Of course, I told Irisa about it. By the way, the reason he didn't tell my mother-in-law that I was in the hospital was apparently because I didn't want to worry her, according to me. My husband's clumsy excuses are so laughable, it's come full circle. "Your husband just got on the last flight. the detective contacted me. My mother-in-law and I laid all the necessary documents on the table and waited for my husband's return. But my husband called me and said this. "Sorry, the meeting took longer than I thought. I missed the last train, so I'm going to take the first one home tomorrow." "Is that so? That sounds tough. Understood. Be careful coming home tomorrow morning." I said that and hung up the phone. Despite having enjoyed his infidelity trip for 3 weeks, my husband still seems unsatisfied. My mother-in-law was furious with him, but I lost all my love for my husband and felt like I could discuss it calmly. And finally, the next morning, my husband came back home cheerfully with souvenirs under his arms. "You seem to have gone on a trip." "I don't remember hearing anything about that though." "Huh? Didn't I tell you?" Sorry, I got along with a client. They invited me on a trip. I had to socialize for work, so I couldn't refuse. I took the luggage from my husband, who was full of life, and led him to the living room. "I'm home." "Oh, Mom, why the scary face? Something happened?" he said and sat down on the chair with a frivolous attitude. He seems to think his mother-in-law is on his side. But as soon as he saw the documents lined up on the table, he turned pale. I sat next to my mother-in-law and pointed to one of the pictures. "A client, huh? How shameless. It seems like you really enjoy your trip with Kelly. Leaving your injured wife behind. Was it a honeymoon for 3 weeks?" "What? What is this? This joke is going too far," he said, looking flustered. "Unfortunately, this is not a joke. The detective has brought the evidence. Did you think you wouldn't get caught staying at a hotel run by a relative? Your dinner conversation were completely overheard. You seem to be lacking in caution." My husband looked like he regretted it. And he turned to his mother-in-law like a child. "Mom, this is just, a lapse in judgment." "A lapse in judgment for a 3-week trip seems a bit long, don't you think?" My mother-in-law brushed off my husband's pleading attitude with a smile. My husband, who seemed to think his mother-in-law would be on his side, was speechless. "Also, this is a document about a claim for compensation. And fill out the divorce papers right now." "Compensation? And divorce? But the only one I really love is Irisa. Can't you forgive me?" I pressed the button on the smartphone on the table. Immediately, the conversation between husband and Kelly recorded by the detective started playing. What could be heard was the raw voice of my husband saying he wanted to divorce me and remarry Kelly, and she agreeing with him. In this situation, my husband's face turned even worse. This was, just getting carried away. I was just excited. I didn't mean it. "Oh, is that so? Well, I don't care either way." I handed the documents to my husband and urged him to write quickly. "I can't pay such a compensation. Please forgive me." "That's right. You've been living a luxurious lifestyle. Where did all that money come from anyway?" My husband mumbled something awkwardly. "I have a bad feeling." "I hope not, but the living expenses. The extra money I told you to give to my mother-in-law. You weren't using that for fun, were you? You did give it to her properly, right?" It wasn't my husband who reacted first to my words, but my mother-in-law. "What? I've never received a penny for living expenses from Jim." My mother-in-law, with a blank look on her face, seemed to be speaking sincerely. "What do you mean? Explain yourself." Both my mother-in-law and I interrogated my shrinking husband. I'm sorry. The living expenses I received, I used it for dates." I felt my love for my husband, which I thought couldn't get any colder, chilling even further. He used all of the approximately $2,000 monthly living expenses I gave him for dates. What's that about? I told you that money was for groceries, utilities, and also as a regular token of gratitude for my mother-in-law. And by the way, that's my money. I'm sorry, my salary alone wasn't enough. I immediately understood that he meant by not enough, and why he used the living expenses. It was the branded items that Kelly had. I guess my husband was the one who bought them for her. I raised my hand, ready to hit my husband. But unexpectedly, my mother-in-law stopped me. My husband was looking at the mother-in-law who stopped me, with hopeful eyes. He still thought that his mother-in-law would be on his side, even in this situation. No, Irisa, if you hit Jin, it'll be disadvantageous for you. After saying that, my mother-in-law turned to face my husband and then slapped him hard across the face. My mother-in-law, in a calm tone, began to talk to my stunned husband. It seems I've spoiled you too much because you were such a foolishly adorable child. I was delighted when you grew up to be a good boy and married a wonderful woman. Your father and I were so happy, but to think that it would come to this, I will cut ties with you now. What? Mom, you're joking, right? My mother-in-law brushed off my husband's pleading hand and handed him a document. The document stated that he was renouncing his inheritance. My husband's eyes widened, and he muttered, I can't believe it. It doesn't matter if you can't believe it, everything is true. Whether he thought he had no choice in the face of my mother-in-law's firm words and attitude, my husband signed while hanging his head. Also, fill this out. I'll claim damages from Kelly as well. I'll add the amount she spent on top. And it seems like everything's out in the open at your company. My husband, no longer having the energy to argue, dropped his shoulders completely and obediently filled in all of my documents as well. After that, as my mother-in-law said, I'll cut ties. My husband ended up leaving the house. Not only had he been spending our living expenses, but it seemed he'd also been using company entertainment expenses, and the company was apparently asking him to repay it. In the end, it seems he's been forced to live a poor life in an apartment without a bath, with what's left after paying the damages and refunding the money he had spent. And of course, I also claimed damages from my husband's mistress, Kelly. Actually, Kelly was also married, and her husband was away on business. So I got in touch with her husband through social media and asked for damages. Although Kelly somehow avoided divorce, she had to quit her job. After that, she seemed to have been forced to live with her husband's parents in their home in the mountains, where there was no internet connection, and she was made to work from morning till night. As for me, I decided to adopt my mother-in-law. I lost my parents early in life, so I decided to take care of my mother-in-law, who had taken care of me until the end as a single family. Although my mother-in-law was initially hesitant due to my husband's affair, she finally accepted. We also decided to sell the house where the three of us used to live. This was to buy a new house for my mother-in-law and me to live in. I want to continue to honor my mother-in-law, who thinks of me as her real daughter.